Welcome to the Can We Talk About It podcast.
I'm Jude.
And I'm Tori.
And this podcast is about us having open, honest dialogue about stuff that we've been dealing with in our lives, especially as two young girls in our 20s.
Some conversations will be heavier than others. Some may be funny, sad, or even triggering.
This is an open playground where we can talk about anything. Hence the title, Can We Talk About It?
So let's get talking. Money, 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 money. Hello and welcome back to episode
3.
I don't know what episode this is.
It is episode 3 of the Can We Talk About It podcast.
Oh my god. So my singing today is just not on point, but is it ever on point?
No.
Well, yeah, welcome back to episode 3. We were talking about money.
Yeah, if you couldn't tell from the intro of Tori's horrendous singing yet again.
Right.
Yeah, so today this was actually a topic that I was pretty excited to talk about. I just think that this is like something personally that I think it's a huge issue for people in their 20s. People are trying to figure out what being financially responsible even means. A lot of people don't know.
So this is in no way a financial advisor episode. We're not accountants by any means. This is just us kind of talking about our own personal relationships with money, and we're going to have a little bit of help, like a little bit of tips here and there, but this is not a financial advisor episode.
Yeah, we have no qualifications or certifications whatsoever as far as money is concerned, but just based on our personal experiences, being in our 20s and trying to figure our finances out, and like also personal research that we've done, this is just kind of what we've like come up with.
So let's jump into the podcast.
So I actually wanted to kind of start off talking about how obviously we all know that being financially responsible and saving money can be really incredibly difficult, if not seemingly impossible in our 20s. And so I kind of want to talk about the fact that people are so uneducated about money. And why do you think that is? Like when we come into our 20s.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it has to do with how people have certain relationships with money based off what their parents told them before. And I think sometimes the way people are raised affects the way that they handle money. Because if you come from a family that's really, what's the word I'm looking for? Just really lazy, I guess, with money.
Financially irresponsible.
Right. You kind of have that. Or if you come from a family that is like, oh, you can have whatever you want, you're going to expect that when you get older, and especially when you're in your 20s, usually in college at that point, in early 20s. So I think a lot of that has to do with the way that your family has with money. So
yeah, so I guess we can kind of talk about like our personal experiences with that and like how they differ, because I know you and I had very different backgrounds. For me personally, my family always had this kind of like living paycheck to paycheck type of lifestyle, and they would always spend any extra amount of money that they had. Like, they wouldn't save it. They would just spend it on, like, things. And so, like, during Christmas time, for example, like, my grandmother would just splurge and spoil us with all these gifts that she couldn't really afford. And instead of, like, putting that money away for us for later. And so when I got older and I started having to I started working when I was 14, but I never really realized that I was supposed to save any of my money. I spent all of the money that I had starting from when I worked at 14 until like just this past year. Like, I would always spend my entire paycheck because I just felt like, oh, I have the money, I have to spend it. And then when I didn't have money, I would freak out and be like, I don't have any money, I'm broke. And like, I just felt like this cycle of where like money was holding me back from being able to do the things that I want to do a lot of the times. But I think like that mindset of like money is the enemy and money's holding me back versus like money is an asset or a resource can be very like detrimental to people's financial health, because a lot of times we see ourselves as not being accountable for our financial health. We kind of see money as like being this thing that controls us rather than us controlling our money. Mm-hmm. And so like personally growing up, like my family never really taught me anything about how to save money or like what you're supposed to do with your money. And my school didn't teach me either. And I know some schools will teach that, but like I don't feel like there's enough of an emphasis on it. I feel like definitely in high school, people should be required to learn more about personal finances, especially since a lot of teenagers are starting to get jobs around that time. I think it's important for them to know about that stuff beforehand, but I just think there's a lack of education there.
My personal experience with money, I come from a family that is not only just very open to talk about anything, from something very minor to something very serious, and money is something that's obviously very serious. So I never had a disconnect, I guess, with money. My family is not rich by any means. Maybe my grandparents are, but definitely not like my parent. But my dad is very good with his money, so I always feel like if there's anything that I wanted, he always made sure that we get it. But it was never a thing of, oh, for example, I'm just going to use, like, I want a new phone, right? I can't just go and ask him, hey, I want a new phone. He's like, okay, I understand that you want a new phone, but what are you going to do to gain that? And even though I didn't necessarily have a job when I was younger, it was still a way to work to get something that you want, which is the same as money. You have to work to get the money. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so my relationship with money is very healthy because my family is very open to talk about certain things. And my dad made sure that my brother and I were financially taken care of because he just wanted us to grow up, better than what he had. Not that he was struggling when he was growing up, but you know what I mean? And he would also give us a certain amount of money every month. And he was like, if you get to the end of the month and you don't have any money left, or, if you spend this much money, for example, so I'll just tell you the whole thing. So he would give us $100 every single month. And he was like, if you get to like the middle of the month and you spend all of it, I'm not giving you any more money left. And $100 may seem very minor, especially now, but in high school and in middle school, $100 was a lot. And maybe in middle school, he would only give us like 50. But in high school, especially in high school, he would always give us 50 to 100, whether that's 50, 75, or 100, just depending on like what he could afford. And if we spent all of that money within the month, we wouldn't get anything back. And that also taught me this idea of, well, if I only spend half of it, by the time I get $100 next month, I'm going to have more money than what I had originally. So it kind of became a thing of saving your money, because by the time you get to your next check, quote unquote, you're going to have more. So that was kind of my first exposure to money. And, the whole idea of money is like, the enemy versus being an asset. I think a lot of that is so true, because so many people are so money hungry, especially now that I'm getting older and I'm starting to be more exposed to certain things. I feel like so many people are so money hungry these days.
Right. I definitely think that the biggest thing that changed my life was I read a book, and it basically told me, like, I don't even remember which book it was, okay, but like I remember reading this one time, money is just a resource that will help you get to the places you want to go, and it will help you accomplish the things you want to achieve.
Right.
So say, for example, you want to travel. You need money to travel. Don't think of it as, oh, I don't have money so I can't travel. Think of it, if I have money, I can travel. And so I think just that simple like flip of the switch and mindset can make the biggest difference. And I think a lot of people like are kind of taught growing up that, like, especially if you have a family that lives paycheck to paycheck and isn't like well off, that money is like this thing that's stopping you from getting the things that you want. Like, for example, my family was very much, they would spend all of their money and they'd be like, oh, we don't have any more money left, we can't afford to do that. And so it just kind of like established this certain relationship with money as I grew up. And so with that being said, I kind of want to start talking about like what is being like financially responsible in our 20s, since a lot of people may not know what that is. And if they do know what this is, it's just a quick recap. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to go over it because this is something that I definitely didn't know until just like a year or two ago. And so I just kind of wanted to run over it really quickly.
Okay.
What do you think is being responsible with your money? Like, what do you think that means?
Well, I think if you have outstanding bills, whether that's credit card debt or you're paying for cable, your phone, whatever, I think getting your bills done first is responsible. One of the things that my dad always says is, I don't believe in bills. So if he has a bill, he's going to pay for it immediately, or as soon as he gets enough money to pay for it, he's going to pay for it immediately. And sometimes my dad tends to like overpay for bills, that way the company owes him. Mm-hmm. But obviously not everybody can do something like that. But it's one of those things that responsible spending is taking care of your responsibilities first. So if I get a paycheck that's $200 and $100 of that is paying for bills, but instead of paying for my bills first, I go out and I buy a new phone. I can't buy a phone $100. I'm just giving an example.
Right.
But if I take whatever responsibilities I need to get done first, that's what I'm going to get done first, instead of spending all of my money on stuff that I don't really need right now. You got to figure out what's a want and what's a need. And I think wanting to pay for your bills off jump is more important.
Right, and kind of going
or
off
needing
of that,
to do it anyway.
yeah, kind of going off of that, actually, I want to ask, what do you do when your bills are larger than your paychecks? Even for me, like, there was a point in time where I had to pay for, like, medical stuff and rent and all these other bills and, like, food expenses and stuff like that. They were much larger than the income that I had. And, like, my debt payments, all of that was much larger than the income that I had. So how do you prioritize then?
Well, I don't know. That's a really interesting question. I have never had that big of a problem before because I think the only time I've had a problem where, for example, like my credit card debt was more, or like the monthly payment was more than I can afford. I would just basically afford what I could and go from there. And that's really tricky, but I've never experienced that before. And so I can't really answer that question because I don't have any crazy outstanding bills. I never had any crazy outstanding bills, if I'm being totally honest.
This is just what I've learned in my experience, because I have, like, had to deal with that before, is that a lot of times the things that we see as a priority or things that we see as, like, bills that are necessary aren't really necessary. Like, there are certain things that we can cut budget-wise out of our bills. So, like, for example, say you have rent payments, you have car payments, you have, like, debt payments and school loan payments and all this other stuff, and you have to, like, really think, like, okay, what can I cut out of this? Say, for example, you have car payments. Well, can you try and either sell your car off and, like, use public transportation or carpool, certain things like that? Because, like, there was a point in time where I had car payments and I couldn't afford them, so I ended up selling my car off, and I would just, like, use my family's cars, or I would carpool, or I'd start walking places.
Yeah, well, everybody can do that.
That's not realistic for everyone, but I think even if the car, for example, is not something that you can cut, there's going to be something else that you can cut out of your expenses. And I think everybody can make cuts to their budget in some way or another.
Right, but I also, now I'm sitting here thinking about it and kind of going off what you said, I think if my bills are more than what I'm making, then clearly I've been too frivolous with my money this month, because there's no reason why my bills should be more than what I'm making if I've established that pattern already, if that makes any sense.
But it's also very possible that people are paying for bills that are larger than their income. Like,
oh, absolutely, but that's something that,
especially if, like, you're
something went wrong. Something just went wrong.
Yeah, if you're, like, in between unemployment and things like that, like, that's...
Yeah, I mean, I understand anything's possible, because I know sometimes rent goes up in an apartment complex, or if you got into a car accident, your insurance skyrockets, or if you have an unexpected medical bill. So there's little moments like that, but if it's just, like, a regular month where I come and I'm like, wait, how come something, like, I don't know.
But I think that's the thing. A lot of people don't live within their means.
Yeah.
The first thing to do if you're in that position is to make cuts to your budget. And as, like, painful as it may be, for example, I went without a phone for an entire year. I only used the internet. I used Facebook Messenger to get in contact with people. I went without a phone for an entire year. And that saved me, like, $50 a month just on phone bills that you have to pay for. I'm like, there are always cuts that you can make, and, like, the matter of fact is there's going to be a trade-off somewhere. It may not be pleasant. You may feel like you need it, but there's always going to be a way that you can get around it. And I think people need to, like, when you get in a position like that, like, you have to be very just, like, stern with yourself. Be like, I can make this work without. It's not going to be easy, but I can make this do without. And then another thing, cutting isn't the only way, but, like, trying to increase your income. And I know this is difficult as well, but just, like, if you have to work 2 jobs for a certain period of time until you get caught up. Like, I did that for several months. I worked 2 jobs. I was working 80 hours a week. It's something that you can't maintain necessarily for the long term, but if you need to do that for the short term to get yourself in a place where you feel like you can sit comfortably, that's always an option. There's also ways to make money through freelance work and online and just doing small jobs, like odd jobs, like dog walking, things like that.
Well, I think there's something to be said about that, because some people, I don't know if you may have said this, but this idea of living in your means, because I don't know how many times I've heard the phrase, like, you want, like, wine money, but you only have water money or something like that. Mm-hmm. And or, you have Walmart money, but you want Target stuff, if that makes any sense.
Right.
I'm messing up the phrases, but you get what I'm trying to say. So if I only make, I'm just going to pick a random number. If I only have $500 every single month, mm-hmm. and my rent is $250, so that's $250 that I have left. Mm-hmm. So what exactly am I doing with that $250? So literally 50 of that, 75 of that is groceries. Maybe $20 of that is gas. if you're in Texas, it's gas. Obviously not in Illinois, but you gotta. I think making budget cuts too, but I think some of the budget stuff is kind of extreme. Like some people need a phone.
Yeah, and like
some people need transportation.
Well, obviously, I'm just saying. Like I think
now, if you go, I saw this thing on Facebook not so long ago where this girl like posted her like bills. She didn't put like her statements on there, but she wrote like what she spends every month, and it was like $150 of that she spent every month on like weed and alcohol. You don't. That's too much. Or there was another one where I saw. It was not a. Hell, it might have been the same person. Who knows? But there was another one where I saw where someone had said their monthly bill is like $100 to $150 of just like stuff that you don't really need. It was like entertainment basically, right. And I was like, what are you doing? That's $150 every month of entertainment. Now I understand if you're a very social person, but if you're social, I can make $150 stretch. You know what I'm saying? If I'm going out to eat, I'm not going to pick something expensive, or I'm going to pick and choose what I need to spend my money on, because there's a reason why I should spend $150 on weed and alcohol. First of all, I don't smoke, but I only spend maybe $20 on alcohol.
Right.
Maybe.
And and here's the thing. Like, obviously, I was using extreme examples because I've been in extreme situations before, but also, like, getting past that, like, there was a point in time last year I was spending $400 a month on eating out.
Yeah, that's too much.
Yeah, obviously. So, like, I feel like that is more of a reality.
You were eating out for breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
I know. I honestly was. And I was eating fast food and stuff that was quote-unquote cheap.
Paying for other people's dinner at that point.
But I was spending $400 a month eating out, like, on average last year. And I feel like that is more of a common thread in people who are, like, in their 20s than, like, the more extreme cases, which I gave examples of. But really, I was just using the extreme cases as, like, if you have to make cuts, there's always going to be a place to make cuts. Obviously, if you can't cut your phone bill, you can't cut your car payments, and you can't cut those certain things out, I'm sure there's something that you can cut, whether it be eating out, whether it be drinking. And like you said, you're a social person, you can make a certain amount of money spread over time. If people can't do that, like if they can't even afford $50 to eat out, I'm sorry, just cut the $50 to eat out because you don't need that. I'm like, it may suck for your social life, but like in the long run, it's going to be better for you, for your finances, for your ability to feel like you're not tied down based on like your lack of money. And eventually you'll be able to get your social life back. It's not going to be permanent. There are other ways to like have a social life and not have to spend money. Last year when I started making cuts to eating out, there were a few people that I started spending less time with because I wasn't spending as much money eating out. But the people who really were like meant to be in my life and that were like spending time with me, like they made adjustments to hang out with me in ways that didn't require us to spend money, if that makes sense.
See, my friends weren't like that. I remember, especially when I didn't have money like that, or I just was being irresponsible with the money that I had, I should say. My friends knew that I was constantly being like, hold on, let me text my dad and ask him to send me $50 so I can eat. They knew that would happen, and at that point they would just stop asking me to go out because they knew that I wouldn't be able to afford it, or they knew that I would use my credit card, which is not what they wanted me to do. And so I would see them go out and I would text whoever and I'd be like, hey, how come you didn't invite me to Topgolf or Chili's or whatever? And they'd be like, well, we know you can't afford it. And that was the worst feeling. That was like my early like teenage years. That was the absolute worst, especially like in those 2 years that I wasn't in school.
Right.
Where, granted, I had all that money from my mom, but I got a car, so all of my money went to my car. So anyway, that was something that I had to really realize that I needed to take a step back and figure out why I had this amount of money this month, and by the time I got to the middle of the month, all of it was gone.
Right. So kind of like going off of that, I just want to make a quick comment is that the fact that you were in a position to where you were spending your money irresponsibly, you're going out with your friends and spending that money when they knew you didn't have the money. You knew you didn't have the money, but you kept spending that money. And I feel like if somebody is afraid of being put in a social situation that's embarrassing like that, wouldn't it be less embarrassing if you took charge and you were like, look, I need to cut back on my spending a little bit. There are certain things that I'm trying to save up for. I was like, can we do something that doesn't cost as much money and go out and do this instead?
See, I didn't have that mentality though, because my friends were all on the same page. And there was no reason why if there's 5 of us going out and I'm one person who's like, oh, can we go someplace that's cheaper? They're going to be like, no, you just don't go. And that's kind of how I was raised to see money. If you can't afford to go here, if you can't afford to pay for this, then you're not going to get it at all. Until you live within your means, that's just kind of how I saw it. So it wasn't like, now that everyone has bills and now that we're all in a decent place relatively with our money, now everyone's like, yo, let's go out. Okay, but let's pick something cheap. Because when you're 18, $100 is a lot of money. But now at 24, $100 is nothing. I can spend $100 in a grocery store, and that's all of it's gone. I don't know why I'm spending that much money at the grocery store.
I can't spend that much money at
the
grocery
store. I
store.
could if I'm
spend
buying,
like $40.
Right, but I mean, I'm saying I could, because some of that could be toiletries, because toiletries add up. But I'm saying, like, I could spend that much.
That'd
and
be
that's
like a special occasion.
You're right, but that's enough for like a whole month maybe. Because it's just me eating. And it's one of those, between the stuff that I bought, there's probably going to be a day where I don't eat any of it because I'm going out to eat, or someone else has bought me food or whatever. But it got to be one of those things that was so embarrassing for me. I remember when I was growing up, because people they told me straight up, we know that you can't afford to go. And there'll be sometimes too where I would say, oh, I want to go out and do this. And my dad's like, well, who's paying for that? And he just was like, you're assuming that everyone is going to pay for you. And I had to realize that very quickly. And it really hit me once I started college. And I was 20 by the time I started college.
Yeah, and see, I think that's like where our backgrounds differ greatly. Because even though I had a poor relationship where I saw money as like being the enemy, and like I kind of saw it as holding me back, you kind of were just put in this position where you were assuming that money was just going to be there when it wasn't.
Exactly.
And so I think there's like, both types of mentalities are a double-edged sword. And so I think that's why like getting into your 20s and figuring out really what is a priority and like what you should be able to spend money on is important. And I think certain things like that, like eating out, that's not a necessity if you're like really like in a tight bind. If you're in like a slightly tight bind but you have a little bit of wiggle room, give yourself $20 to go out like once a month with some friends. Like, don't deprive yourself, because I think depriving yourself, like, if you're so focused on money that like you're not able to live your life, that defeats the purpose. But also, you want to be responsible. And so like if you have to cut out eating out for a few months so you can afford to eat out like twice a month later on and like have that social life, I'm like, then you got to kind of weigh like what's your priorities. Would you rather be stuck in this position forever and like you're stuck in a cycle of not having money and feeling stuck, or would you rather take some time off from spending money on certain things, and not forever, but just like a short amount of time until you have your finances together, and then you can afford to live within your means and still enjoy the things that you want to enjoy, but not excessively so.
I think to kind of carry on that conversation, I had such a horrible relationship with money because, like you said earlier, I was expecting money to be there always. And I got hit with the hard reality after, I would say, the first like year and a half of me being at school. And the money that I was using was like all refund check, right? Most people who get refund money, that's usually what they rely on. I remember when my brother was in college, he was like, my refund money goes strictly toward rent or groceries or whatever. But it got to the point where I had all this refund money, right? All of it. And it was like a lot too. It was enough that I could have lasted 6 months. All of that was gone within 2 months. And when I went back and looked over my statements, I was not only just buying food, but Chicago is expensive, so there's that. But I was buying food that I didn't need to buy. I was constantly going to the movie theater. But when I would go to the movie theater, instead of either eating before I went or paying attention to like how much stuff cost, I was spending like $20 at the movie theater. And that's just not for a ticket. I'm like, oh, I'm going to get a soda. I'm going to get chips. I'm going to get this. I'm going to get this. I spent all of this money, and by the time it came down to me buying stuff that I actually needed, like new clothes, new shoes, if I needed them, or school books, or actual groceries, or if, because I don't have to go to the doctor often, but I should go to the doctor often and get my blood work checked on and my heart and everything. So instead of doing stuff like that, I wasn't doing any of that. So when it came time for me to actually pay for stuff that I needed, I didn't have any money. And there was this one time where I spent up all of this money, and I looked at my account and I had like $20, and we were still heavily in the semester. It was like maybe October, and I still had to get through November and December, and then the Christmas time, and then you get your new refund check in January. And it got to the point where I would call my dad, and he'd be like, what happened to all that money you had? And I was like, well, he'd be like, well, I'm sorry, I can't help you. And I'm like, no, but you don't understand, like, I don't have any money. And he would say, I can't help you. That's a personal problem. And I was like, so you're going to let me go hungry? And he's like, well, you let yourself go hungry. That's not on me. So I got hit with the really harsh reality very quickly because, and even before that, I had my credit card, which we'll talk about credit cards a little bit later on, but I got hit with the credit card where my credit card max, I hit it within like a month. And my grandparents were like, they did it for the first time. The second time they gave me such crap about it. And since that time, that was probably, it's 2019 now. I think the last time they did that was like 2015, 2016. So like in the middle of me going to school. Yeah. That was the last time that they maxed it out. So that was a couple years ago. I haven't touched my credit card since. Granted, I used it earlier this year because I was running out of money, but my credit card debt is no more because I paid it off. So it became one of those things where I got hit with a very harsh reality because in my head, I'm like, oh, someone's going to give me money. But now that I'm making my own money and now that I am responsible for my own stuff now, I had to learn very quickly that, just because it's there doesn't mean I have to spend it. Yeah.
And like, actually, it's funny because you said something where you were kind of talking about how basically you ran out of money and you were like, I need money. And like, you would ask them and they were just kind of like, no. Yeah. And I remember when I was in Korea for a year and 3 months, I wasn't able to work. Like, I taught English part-time, which was like under the table cash. Don't tell anyone. Okay. But yeah, I was an English tutor part-time and I earned cash from that. But it was like maybe $100 a month. And that's like not enough to live in Korea off of. You know what I mean? So kind of like with that, I had the same exact problem. I would spend all my money and then I would contact my grandmother and I'd be like, I need money. I'm out of money. And she's like, where'd you spend all your money? Yeah. And I'm like, dance classes. I mean, to be fair, like, I knew what I was doing. Like, I would spend all of my money on dance classes. Like, my food money, I spent it on dance classes while I was over there because I just thought dance classes were more important. Like, that's the reason I went over to Korea. And it got to the point where she was like, I'm not giving you any money. And so I would find myself collecting change off the ground or just collecting change in general. And I would, like, put together, like, all my change and count it out. And I'm like, okay, I've got 7,000 won, which is about $7, and I would be like, that's enough to buy 7 days worth of ramen, and I would have like 1 cup of ramen a day, and like that's how I basically like got by. But like obviously that's not sustainable, and like nobody should live like that. So it's like got to the point where even just last year when I was spending like $400 a month on eating out, and I kept asking like my family for money, my grandmother was like, where are you spending all this money? And I would tell her, I'm like, honestly, I don't know where I'm spending this money. I just know that it's gone. And like, it was the worst feeling to feel like I spent all this money. I don't even know what I spent it on. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, it's just like you have this total feeling of like loss of control. Yeah. And I feel like so many people in their 20s genuinely have a spending problem. They don't realize it. And I realize like I have a spending problem. It's not just like I'm not paying attention or like I'm just spending blah, blah, blah or whatever. Like, like I actually legitimately had a problem. Like, I was just like spending this money and I wasn't paying attention. And so it took me a while to get my finances together. Like, I've been working on it for the past about a year now. And like I finally have an emergency savings fund of $1,000 as of this summer. Woo, yay. And like I'm working on paying off my credit card bill right now. And then after I get that paid off, I'm going to be working on building my emergency fund even more so I can live off of it for a few months if something happens. But it's so funny because just like, I don't know if this story's going to be relevant. I told my grandmother just like, it was earlier today, like I told her I was like, I'm broke. I was like, when am I getting like my money? Because she sends me money from child support that my mother owes her because I was raised by my grandmother. But my mom sends child support money in every single month. And I was like, when are you sending that money in to my account? And she was just like, oh, probably later this week. Like, why? And I was like, well, I'm broke. And she was like, I thought you were getting like your stuff together. And I was like, yeah, but I can't dip it in my savings account. So it's just like, it's funny because she was like suddenly like worried that I spent all my money again. You know what I mean? And so it's hard to rebuild that trust as well.
Oh, it is. And I had to learn that the hard way because I still have problems now, but it's not as bad as it was 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago. I think I don't know. I got hit with that hard reality of if you want something, you have to go and get it yourself type thing. Right. And I had such a problem with spending money because I was in my head, I saw, oh, I have $100 in my bank account. I have money. And I'll go and I'll buy something that's $75 and then I'm left with nothing. Yeah. And so that kind of, I think goes into that. And so now that I just have a better relationship with money, there's certain things that I'm like, how much is this? $20? No, that's too much.
Right. Really, so we can kind of get into our next point is that it's a process as far as like learning how to have like a good relationship with your money. It's not something that like happens overnight or suddenly like you turn around like, I'm gonna make this budget, and then like because you've made the budget, suddenly you've stuck to your budget. No, you can still go off of your budget that month if you set a budget. And so like there are times like I have slipped up. Like there was this past few months, like a few months ago, I can't remember, it was just a few months ago, that I ended up spending like $300 again on the eating out, and I was like, ooh, so next month I was on top of it again. See, that's the thing, like it's not going to be easy to fix like your spending habits overnight, but it's definitely doable, and it just takes time, and I think it's worth doing.
Yeah.
But yeah,
so let's jump into the whole debt thing.
Yeah, so actually we can kind of do debt and emergency fund together. I think a lot of people, because we were talking about budgeting, so I think a lot of people neglect like their debt and their emergency fund as something that they should budget. And so a lot of people don't prioritize saving enough. And I feel like prioritizing saving is like really important. Like I treat payments to my savings as like a bill.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people don't prioritize that. They're like, oh, I can save after I've paid off all this stuff and after I've done this. I'm like, no, savings is like part of a payment that I have to make.
Yeah.
And so I think that's important. A lot of people neglect to do that. And like
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was saying I think sometimes with emergency savings, unless you have the money to put away $100 every time, one of the things that my dad always told me was put away what you can. And so he was like, if you can only do $5 every time you get a check, then only do $5 or whatever. So that's kind of how I saw with emergency savings, where it's like, okay, well, I can only do $5 this month, but next month I can do $100.
Right.
Or that's an extreme jump, but you get what I'm saying.
Personally, I think, yeah, like I agree with that 100%. I do think it helps to have a consistent like automatic payment every month, but obviously make it something that you can afford. Like don't say you're going to make $100 if you can't afford $100. If you can do $20 a month, do $20 a month. Something that I tried, like a lot of people have this idea of like the 50-30-20 concept, which is like a savings type, like a way to budget your money, and they basically say you should put 20% into savings. If you can't afford 20%, try putting 10% of every single income that you earn. Like, so every time I got paid, I just automatically put 10% into my account. And that's how I kind of got started. And sometimes, so if I got $100, I put $10 in. You know what I mean? Yeah. And like, that's honestly not a lot. You still have $90 left over. There's a lot you can do with that. And so just kind of start small. And if like you can't do 10%, try 5%. And then like once you're able, like once you feel confident, and I think that's something that like helps, this is kind of going to roll into like what we talk about debt as well, is that like once you see that you're starting to save money and you see that like you can actually do it, I think it builds up that momentum and allows you to feel further motivated to put even more into that, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, kind of moving on to debt now.
So there's obviously outstanding, I shouldn't say outstanding debt as if it's never going to go away, but student loans are just the god awful worst. And yeah. I just graduated from school, so that's going to hit me soon. I think they give you like a few months grace period to like figure your shit out, and they're like, give us money. So whoever becomes the next president, let's hope they forgive all the student loans, because it's like in the billions and trillions, but whatever. Anyway, so I think with debt, I have a credit card. Now, I haven't used a credit card in like 3 months, and I don't plan on using it anytime soon unless there's an emergency. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I remember with my credit card was when I first got it, there was obviously interest that needs to be paid. So, for example, if my credit card limit, or I only spent $20, the bank is going to ask me for $25 because of interest. Right. So I think that's the stuff that didn't click in my head until I started seeing those interest bills pay up. Yep. And sometimes my credit card interest for the month, for example, if 1 month it's $25, the next time I have to pay, it's $30. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, how come it's $30? And it's just like, that's just interest. So I had to learn what that means. But with credit card, I saw it as free money when I first got my credit card, which I was 18 when I got my credit card, because that's when I got all that money from my mom's life insurance. But so if I went out to eat and I knew that on my checking account I only had $15 in my credit, or my bill was $20, I'd be like, oh, I just used my credit card, it's fine. But that's not how credit cards work, obviously. But in my head when I first got it, because no one told me about credit, they gave me a quick run through of how it worked. But in my head, I'm like, oh, it's just free money. And so I understand now why people get into credit card debt, or they have so much, not because they think it's free money, but because it's like, oh, it's in money immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was using my credit card on stuff that I didn't need to use my credit card on. I was using it for, oh, we're going to the movies. That's $15 right there. Oh, we're going to go to Chili's. Let's put something on the credit card. Oh, we're just random stuff that I didn't need. Eventually I started to realize that my credit card was for emergencies, like super high emergencies or really big payments. So I bought a laptop when I was like about 2018 or 2018. That was last year.
When you were 2018?
Well, no, I was saying I bought it when I was 18, but for some reason 2018 came out. So I bought this laptop, and the laptop cost me, I think, like $600.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have $600, but my credit card did. And so I told my dad, would it be smart for me to do this? And he was like, either you just wait until you get some more money, or you can use your credit card but then make payments. He's like, but eventually you're going to need to pay it off in full. So I bought my laptop, and I waited. I think I did like 2 months of payments, which was like $30.
Right.
And then once that first month went, I paid it all full because like I said, I don't believe in bills. So if I can afford to pay the bill off immediately, I'm going to do it. But if I can only throw in $10, $15 every month, then I'm going to do that.
Right. Yeah, so that kind of goes into like the snowball effect. The snowball effect, basically, if you guys don't know what that means, is it means pay off your smallest amount of debt first, and that gives you the momentum to pay off your larger amounts of debt. Even though a lot of people will hear you're supposed to pay off your highest interest payments first, they say pay off your smallest debt beforehand. So, for example, if you have like a $2,000 maxed out credit card, pay off the $2,000 credit card first, and then you can tackle your $30,000, $40,000 student loans. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because like if you try to tackle your $30,000, $40,000 student loan before you do $2,000, you're gonna feel so overwhelmed. If you pay off your $2,000 credit card first, you're gonna be like, okay, I can pay this off, and now you're ready to tackle like the bigger one. And that's kind of when you get into like the pay off the one that has the higher interest. So if you got like a $40,000 student loan and it's got higher interest than, say, you've got another $30,000 student loan, obviously pay off the $40,000 one first because it has higher interest. Even though it's the larger bill, you don't want to tackle the smaller amount. So that's kind of what they talk about, like, with debt. And I think having, like, a debt payoff date, like, helps so much. Like, knowing, like, when something is going to be paid off. Like, for me, my credit card's going to be paid off by the end of this year.
Yeah.
And so I know how much I need to keep paying towards that in order to have it paid off. And I think people make the mistake of, like, just trying to pay it off, but they don't have a clear end date in mind.
Oh, well, I mean, that's kind of hard to figure out.
Yeah, but I think having that figured out makes you know, like, I have to have this paid off by then. And even if it's not realistic, like, there are people that I've listened to, like, Matt Diabella is someone that I watch on YouTube, and he had, like, $198,000 in student loans that he had to pay off, and he told himself, I'm going to pay this off in 2 years. He ended up paying it off in 4 years, but he still paid it off because he gave himself a deadline. And I think having that deadline rather than like, oh, I'm just going to pay this off when I can pay it off, like, I think having that kind of mindset makes it impossible to pay off your debt in full because you're going to give yourself too much slack when things get rough. And so I think having a deadline keeps you motivated and forces you to really, like, stay on top of it and be like, okay, I have to pay off this much if I want to get paid off by that time, by my deadline, if that makes sense.
Right.
So we've already talked about how it's difficult, like, in our 20s, because we may not be making as much money. We may be living paycheck to paycheck. We obviously, like, are in school full time a lot of the time, so it's hard to work.
Yeah.
How have you dealt with that? Since you've been, like, you just graduated, how have you been dealing with the past 4 years, like, trying to earn money and save money while also being in school?
Most of it has been refund money, to be fair. Every year, the prices, because our tuition at school kept going up, so every year my refund money would be less and less, but it was still enough to get me by, you know? Mm-hmm. So especially after that first year and a half where I was just, like, blowing it all in one sitting, once I got to, like, my junior and senior year, I had jobs over the summer, so, like, that helped because I would go into the semester with already, you know, let's just say $300 in my pocket. That didn't seem like a lot, but it's just something in my head that I was like, okay, I know I'm going to have an extra this much. But it got to the point where I set out what I know I needed off jump, which was I know I needed books, and books are expensive. So that's $100 to $175, depending on how many books I needed for the semester.
Yeah.
So I would know, for example, my junior year, I remember I, like, wrote everything I needed down, everything that I needed, not everything that I wanted, everything that I needed. And so I knew that my books this one year were going to cost me $110.
Yeah.
That seems like a lot, but I know people pay more money for books, but I knew it was going to cost me $111. So, or $110 for my books. So I just bumped it up to like $130 just to be safe, just in case.
Yeah.
Amazon books cost more, Chegg, whatever. So I always round it up. In my head, I'm like, I have $10. Really, I only have $5. So that way I have. Does that make any sense?
Yes.
So anyway, so if I knew that my books cost me $110, I would say, okay, it's actually $130. So that way when I finish my bill, I still have money left over.
Right.
So that's kind of, that probably doesn't make any sense, but it works for me. So I would do that. And I knew that, okay, I needed a new winter coat. That's $100. I knew that I need groceries right now. That's $75, whatever. So there would be, I would all write down everything I needed right then and there. And then once it was over, I'm like, okay, I'm probably going to have about $600 left. I'm just giving a random number.
Yeah.
So then I say, I have 600. I'm going to cut that in half. So now I only have 3. I'm going to cut that in half. So that's what, one something?
150.
So that's how I do. And then I even cut that down in half. I don't divvy up my money like that, but in my head, I'm like, I only have this much. And then I give myself money to spend every single month. And if I over exceed that, then something's wrong. So
Yeah.
I always just cut everything in half.
So you had like a more informal way of budgeting, basically.
Oh, hell yeah. And
Yeah.
my way of processing money, it probably sounds so ridiculous and crazy, but that's just how it is for me, and that's just how I work.
I mean, yeah, if that works for you. then
Yeah, and that's just how I work because...
But it's still, it sounds like you're budgeting, but you're just doing it like in your head, really.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
so, like,
sometimes
you're-
I will separate my money, though.
Yeah, but like you're aware of like where your money is, and, like where you're putting it, and that's good.
Mhm.
Like for me personally, like I have to use an app because I can't keep track of my money like that, especially since I don't have cash. Since I use all my payments on my card, I'm very, very bad with money, and so I use an app to keep myself accountable. And so that's just like my personal preference. But I think if you're able to do that, like that's great because you're still budgeting, and that's what matters.
Yeah, and one of the things that I did because I was trying to keep myself honest, and this is probably going to sound so stupid, but I literally would go, okay, my money for the month is, let's just say $110. I would literally take whatever is left and I'd put it in my savings, and on my checkings it would say 110.
Yeah.
And when I got to the end of the month, however much is left, I would take whatever my savings that's going to add up to 110. That's just to keep myself honest with my money. So if I spent all of it by the middle of the month, then I would go, well, I can't really jump into my savings because if I pull out the 110 that I need for the month, that's less than I'm going to have for the next month.
Yeah.
So I would literally do that with myself. I don't do that now, but especially in the early times of me trying to figure out money properly, I would literally just take out what I needed and put everything else in my savings because nothing gets taken out of my savings. So that's kind of how I was handling my money. And now I obviously have money in my savings that I haven't touched in like 3 months.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a weird way of budgeting, but I mean, if it helps, it helps.
Yeah, and so like now that you're you've just graduated, and obviously like it's really difficult to find a job right after college. Like, how do you feel about money and finding a job and all that stuff? Like, what are you thinking right now?
I'm worried because I have a good footing right now. I have extra money elsewhere if I run out. But to answer your question, I'm worried about money because in my head, I'm like, well, at some point, I'm going to start paying my student loans off. And that's going to be however much money every single month. Plus, if I find a place to live, that's however much a month. Plus, I got to pay for gas for my car. Then I have to eat. Then I just have to survive on my own.
Right.
So I'm worried about money because at this point, everything's going to start hitting me with my own bills. And at some point, I'm going to have I'm on my dad's health insurance now, but when I turn 26 in 2 years, that's not going to be the case.
Yeah.
So I'm worried about making sure I either have enough money to afford my own or I have a job that has the benefits for it. And so there's a lot of other stuff that I'm worried about.
Plus, now you don't have the luxury of having that refund money or loans to cover your like living expenses.
Exactly. So I'm worried about money, but I think because, especially over the last year, I've become a lot better with my money that I'm worried I'm going to go back to where I was before. I'm going to be relying on either my dad or my grandparents or my credit card, and I don't want that. So I'm trying to, when I'm looking at jobs, I'm obviously looking at how much they're paying every month, but I'm also thinking of, well, a job is a job. Money is money. If I'm only getting $100, that's $100 I wasn't getting before.
Right.
I can't obviously live off $100 a month, but you see what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. So money is money at this point. So in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, well, I know my check is only going to be, for example, my job over the summer that I had last year, I got $400 to $600. So that was every 2 weeks. So in my head, I knew that I had to live within those means. So with my job now, I have a couple of job interviews coming up. Now I'm thinking, okay, well, in my head, these checks are going to be this much, I have to live in that budget. So I have to find an apartment that can sustain that. I have to give my dad this much money for my insurance right now just to kind of help him out.
Yeah.
So I'm worried about money just because at this point, everything's going to start piling on because like you said, I don't have that refund. I don't have those loans. And I just don't want to revert back to old habits. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah. And I think that makes perfect sense. And I think it's important to also, like how I said before, that it takes time. And sometimes we do revert back to our old habits. But I think the fact that you're aware is enough in itself. Like, I think that you'll continue to just make progress.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm also in college, and so I'm using loans. I've been taking out private loans. I know it's not the smartest thing, but I can't afford to go to college otherwise. And I feel like
Everybody does it.
college is important enough to me. I know a lot of people refuse to, like, they won't go to a college unless they can afford to cover it entirely with financial aid. I can only afford to get half of my expenses covered with financial aid, and I go to an art school, so I have been taking out like so much private loans just in the past year and a half. And so obviously I know I'm gonna have a lot of debt when I get out of college, and I'm worried about that. But obviously it's still another 3 years off, so I'm like not so worried about it, because I'm like, I would rather try and get my finances together now, the things that I can control, and then worry about that later. But I think that's another reason why I'm trying to be smart while I'm in college and try to get my finances figured out now, is so that when that does happen, I'm prepared to take on that huge expense.
Yeah.
And I know right now, like, I'm not having to pay for my housing out of pocket because my loans cover my housing. But obviously at some point that's going to change. And so I feel like, yeah, it's hard, like, being in college. Like, it's hard to juggle full-time, like, school with a job. Like, I work on the weekends and during the summer and during, like, the winter breaks and stuff, I work, and I have to give up doing certain activities and doing certain social things because I have to work.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, that's just kind of like the trade-off that I've chosen. I would rather be financially stable in the long run and make small sacrifices now. That doesn't mean that I always sacrifice my social life. Like, I still have a social life. It's just not as extravagant as, like, I may want it to be.
And I think that's the interesting thing too, because I remember when I was younger, my brother used to tell me that when you start buying it and you start making your own money, your whole attitude's going to change. Suddenly, if someone, for example, if you bought your own house and someone comes over and they put their feet up on the couch, you're going to feel differently versus when you're at home and it's your dad's stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So he's like, when you start making your own money or you start buying your own things, you're going to look at it completely different.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I know that now, especially now that I have my own money, I'm like, I'm not paying for that. And I become really frugal and I become really selfish when it comes to certain things. Yeah. Because I'm like, how much is that? No, that's too much.
Yeah, like, if somebody wants to go out to eat to a restaurant that I just, like, don't really care for, and I'm like, how much is that? They're like, $20. I'm like, I'm not putting $20 down on food that, like, I don't really need or
so either I'll eat before.
Money on. Yeah, I'm like, I'll go out with you, but,
or
like,
I'll just get, like, some water,
right?
Maybe a chip or two.
Yeah, I'm like maybe that makes me seem cheap, but, like, you know what? Like, there are certain things that you have to realize what is your priority for yourself.
And you just gotta live within your means.
Yeah, you have to put yourself above other people, and I think financial security and financial health is something that should be prioritized by more people in their 20s, and I'm sure a lot of people in their 20s are starting to realize that. But yeah, I think it's important to figure out sooner rather than later as well. Mm-hmm. So with that being said, like, we just kind of wanted to run over, I guess, like, our different struggles and, like, perspectives on money and, like, how we've been dealing with that and, like, how we're continuing to deal with that, because I figured people would relate.
The biggest thing about money is just be smart about it. I think sometimes people get caught up in, like, crazy budgeting. If crazy budgeting works for you, by all means, go for it. If extreme couponing works for you, be an extreme couponer, but just be responsible with your money. If you can't afford it, you can't buy it.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean restrict yourself, but also, like, know your limits.
Mm-hmm. Live within your means, you know what I'm saying? Don't
deprive yourself, but live within your means.
Yeah, and it's just, if you can only afford something that's $200, don't be ashamed of that.
Yeah. Because we're all, like, honestly, we're all struggling with this.
Yeah, and just being smart.
Yeah, you're not alone. There's a lot more people out there who are struggling financially than you would imagine.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't talk about it out loud. But yeah, Tori, do you want to close out this podcast with a quote?
To end the podcast, the quote of the podcast, quote of the week is, money is numbers, and numbers never end. If it takes money to be happy, your search for happiness will never end. And that, of course, was the late, great Bob Marley.